Up next on Beyond the Clef, we have Kristen Boulet, and we're going to be talking about clarinet pedagogy, specifically talking about some of your setup, your equipment, and some of the things that she's doing with both Conn-Selmer and Van Doren.
Beyond the Clef is presented by Director's Choice.
Kristen, thank you so much for being on the program. Of course, we've been good friends for a while now.
Quite a while.
You come out and work with me and kick my behind all the time with Clarinet Land, but you are a lot of things for a lot of different companies right now, it seems, but mainly private lesson teacher and clarinet consultant. And now, what are your titles with Conn-Selmer Van Doren?
So with Conn-Selmer, I'm a performing artist with the Selmer Paris, and with Van Doren, I'm a regional artist.
Okay. What does that mean?
With Conn-Selmer, for instance, last May, I did a solo performance with the Terra Wind Symphony in Atlanta. So I go out and I do a lot of different kinds of performing with different orchestras, youth orchestras, wind orchestras. And I also am now beginning to do some educational things with Conn-Selmer as well, in working with young band directors and working with different programs about our actual instruments and what we have to offer for those directors and their kiddos. With Van Doren being a regional artist, which means in the Dallas-Fort Worth area specifically, although I'm lucky I get to go out to West Texas and work with your kids, as a regional artist, it is very educational based, teaching about our products, the Van Doren family products with Danzer, but helps directors understand the relationship between the mouthpieces, the reeds, the ligatures, and how they coordinate and correlate with our instruments. So that's been really great for a lot of directors in learning the details about why reeds do what they do in different parts of the state of Texas. Because really we've got every season and every climate pretty much known to man in our great state. So it's really fun to be able to work outside of the practice room, where I spend a lot of my time in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I have a big studio. I also play professionally the Lone Star Wind Orchestra and do a lot of musical playing and stuff like that. But getting to go outside of that and reach out and touch all the directors and their clarinet, make sure their clarinetists are good to go with their equipment and setups and stuff.
And one thing that I was really interested in when we were talking once was you do some sessions, of course, like a clarinet session for band directors, and you came out and did that for my district. And
Right.
One thing that you said was it's really fascinating that you've done these sessions in the DFW area, Houston area, El Paso area, Lubbock, and across the state, there are the same problems that you see.
Very
right?
consistent, very
Right.
consistent
And
throughout the board.
Some of the things, of course, I'd love to sit here and be able to talk to you for 3 hours about that, like you did when you came out, because
Right.
I learned so much from that session. But if you kind of just hone in on a couple of those things,
Absolutely.
you have your clarinet here. Let's talk equipment.
So equipment is really important from the get-go. Whether you're starting on a plastic clarinet, whether it's a wooden instrument, whatever brand it is, equipment is very important, specifically from the top down. Your mouthpiece, your ligature, your reed is really the number one location of sound, and those things are highly important. But assembling the instrument is also equally as important. So we'll talk equipment first. I am obviously being a Conn-Selmer artist, our products I feel are really wonderful as far as the quality and the intonation, quality of sound. And you're looking for an instrument that's going to have a good tone, but also a good scale of intonation. If you're looking for wood, and in the great state, we really do want our clarinetists to have wooden clarinets, because then they can play several years with it before they go to the high school level or step up into a pro horn. And depending on your socioeconomic situation, whether you start on plastic or wood could be a great difference. So starting on like a serenade, is a wonderful option. That's the new horn by Julian Bliss, and it's LeBlanc is the manufacturer of the instrument, and it's all a United States product. It's all built in the United States, mainly in the Elkhart plant in Indiana. But what's really important, like I had stated a minute ago, was the top portion of your instrument, which is the mouthpiece, the ligature, and the reed, are really the most important part of the equipment for any beginner, because your sound is going to come from here. So making sure that you start on a really great mouthpiece. I personally prefer, of course, our Van Doren products. The M15 is a wonderful mouthpiece, not just as a beginner level, but even as a 7th and 8th grade level and into high school. The M13 lyre, sometimes there's some intonation issues with certain brands, so we always want to make sure that, you know, whatever instrument you're choosing matches the mouthpiece you're going to choose with that instrument. 5RV lyre, it's kind of been one of those mouthpieces that back in the day we used, but people kind of got away from it. A lot of that's because of the reed strength selection that they chose. And that's really important. When you're choosing a mouthpiece, that you pick the right reed strength to go with it, and that's based on the facing. The facing of a mouthpiece is basically the distance between the reed tip and the mouthpiece itself. The facing is really important because if you have a facing that's really wide, you can't have a reed that's super strong. You've got to have a softer reed so it's pliable enough to reach the tip. And a lot of times with the 5RV lyre, we'll put on a reed that's too hard. And so then the student they get a stuffy sound, or they get a really hard, it's hard to blow through, or they might squeak a lot. So we really want to make sure that the strength of the mouthpiece matches the facing. And that's something that regional artists go out and help band directors figure out what facing and what reed match together the best. And then ligature-wise, we like to start our students on our MO ligature, mainly because of the great clarity in the sound, the color, and the articulation benefits. We feel like it really gives them a great, crisp sound, and especially to the clarity of their articulation is really does benefit from having a metal ligature.
I like the MO ligature for the more technical reasons of it's so much easier for the kids to put on, and a 6th grade child with so many things that have set up. I love that there's one screw, and then on the other side there is
there's a groove.
A groove for the reed.
Right, there's a groove inside.
It's super easy for the kids to be able to get that.
Because the reed will literally just fit right in that groove, and they can understand how it fits.
Right.
So that's what's really great in the benefit of this particular kind, and it comes in 5 different metal choices.
How do I choose which one?
So, good question. So we have silver, pewter, black, gold, and now rose gold. This has been out for about a year, and it's really quite beautiful. So your metal ligatures go anywhere from a bright sound to a dark sound. So your silvers, the silver and the black are on the brighter end. So if you have a mouthpiece that tends to be on the warmer side, like our BD5, you might want to go with a silver or a black ligature. Or if you really want that ultra dark warmth in your sound, you want to go with the rose or the regular gold. And the pewter just kind of sits right in the middle and really matches well with all of the mouthpieces. And it's very cost effective. It's really quite great in the price point for a beginner.
What I will interject at this point and say that I've worked with you for a couple of years now on helping me with my clarinet players, and I think it was even before you were working with these companies. And if this all sounds like to our audience a big ad for these companies, it's really not. You care more about what the kids are doing and teaching the kids and getting them the right equipment for their needs, because we had a long discussion the last time you were there about have all my kids on a different instrument and which instrument is right for them and the selections, and I trust you so much because I don't feel like you're ever trying to sell me a product.
Right, and that's what
you're trying to get what's best for the kids there.
And that is not what I chose. When I chose to work with these companies, it was very clear and very specific that it was not about selling, it was about educating.
Right.
And that is our number one policy, both with Conn-Selmer and Van Doren, is to educate our directors and help find the best fit for every kid, and especially help directors understand how to come up with that in their area, because every area is different, and every program is different, and what they want from their clarinetist is different. So it's great to be able to, and any time I go out, whether it's working with your kids or whether it's working with any kids across the entire state, it is free to the directors. There is no charge, no cost to them whatsoever. So that's what I find really, I mean, also, there's no sales pitch here, and I'm probably would be the worst salesperson ever, but I'm very passionate about what I think is great about clarinet playing and what is going to be successful to all of our directors in the state. So that, it really boils down to education and having the best success for our young clarinet players.
Well, let's go back to the ligature.
Okay.
One of the problems that I have constantly with my players is they're not putting it in the right place.
So what's great about the ligature and about our mouthpieces in general, and working with reeds and mouthpieces and ligature, it's very important to put the ligature on first. If we're putting the ligature on second, sometimes we have the reed up there, we might chip it, we might gouge it, and then we've got a broken reed. So I always put the ligature on first, and then I slightly move the reed in between the ligature and the mouthpiece by kind of elevating the ligature, like so, moving it up and down. And then once it's in position, you can kind of line it up better with the side rails of the reed, and then you line it up. And what the number one issue I find across the state with young players, directors who are not too sure of where the reed goes on the actual facing of the mouthpiece and the rails, and that is, it should be even with the tip of the mouthpiece so it can vibrate evenly to the actual tip. And a lot of times I'll see it below the tip.
That's because that was kind of the
right.
myth, the lore was it has to be just slightly below.
Right.
You convinced me otherwise.
Well, because when it's slightly below, you're going to get a little more of a stuffy sound because the reed has too much air going between it, and it's not vibrating at the tip. It has to vibrate at the tip. And where that folklore kind of came from, and it's two school of thoughts. You have the below the tip and you have the even with the tip. We're kind of both on that same, there's two different philosophies.
People are passionate. It's like they have signs in their yard.
Yes, it's true. It's like, I am team below the tip and I'm team even. Well, I'm team even, and here's why. Because when the reed vibrates absolutely evenly with the tip of the mouthpiece, you're going to get your best tone, you're going to get clarity, you're going to get a better intonation. I just feel like it's super important. Where the below the tip, it was like we just need a black sliver or a black line, and what that really is once the reed is wet, you can push the tip of the reed evenly against, and when the reed is wet, you can actually see a black sliver when you're pressing the reed exactly even with the tip of the mouthpiece. Because, a lot of times you'll see directors go, well, it's kind of high, and you're like, but it's an optical illusion. You have to press it just gently. You don't want to dig in there, you'll bend the reed. But if you press it, it's like the reed disappears at the tip. And that's where that black sliver came into it, and a lot of people just didn't explain it very carefully long ago. The other thing about it is that you have to look at the bottom of the mouthpiece as well, and you have to make sure that it's even down here as well as even up here. So if it's a little offset, you're going to get you might end up with some squeaking because it's kind of causing some leakage in the rails, and then it's air's coming out of the side of the reed, and then it's going to squeak a little bit, a very high pitched squeak. So you want to make sure that the reed is even at the bottom, even at the tip, And then when the ligature is placed, you're going to see a little bit of bark at the top, and you're going to see a little bit of bark at the bottom. If your ligature is too low or all the way at the bottom, you're going to end up with the reed being way too bright, too edgy, and if it's way at the top, it's going to be really stuffy. So you want to have that evenness between the bark, and then once you have that all in place, I usually put my thumb right there, and then I tighten it with the one screw, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
It's just that simple, but
I always like the one
detailed.
screw design because on the I was using for a while the 2-screw design, and one would be off and one would not, and the kids wouldn't get it just right between each one. And
Right.
they tighten one so hard, and the other one it would be too loose.
Exactly. And two, with the 2-screw, you know, typically you want to have the bottom screw to be really tight and the top screw to be a little snug, and that's to emulate the 1 screw. So if you just get a 1-screw ligature to begin with, and then it's easy. And what's great about this is it really locks into place. The kids can't over tighten it. So they can't just keep, you know, they're talking to their friend and they're not paying attention and it's so tight and they can't even get it undone, you know. But this one locks into place. It won't go. Once it's on, it won't go any further, and then it's
great.
easy to come off. So love this ligature. It's really great. And I love the options available.
I feel that beginning clarinet is one of the most difficult instruments to teach because you just have to know a lot of, I always call it my bag of tricks. I got to pull out my bag of tricks, and I always get so excited because when I have one way to say one thing to one child and it fixes their problem, and all of a sudden their sounds great. I'm like, oh, now I learned how to do clarinet, I can teach it. And I go to the next kid who has the exact same problem and I tell them the exact same thing, and it doesn't help. You just have to know 5 or 6 different ways to tell them. So let's talk about clarinet embouchure, because that is the key to clarinet.
It is.
And it can make or break you.
Yeah.
And by the way, I need you to come out like next week really bad to work with my kids. So let's come on and get you out there.
So obviously the first step is to have the right equipment, but then absolutely the embouchure to create the best tone is super important. And where young people have the most difficulty, and where we run into that having to have the bag of tricks, is we have to have different ways to show them how to use the muscles in their embouchure, because they've never used them before, and so they're like, well, what do I do? They get all twisted around, and what am I doing with my mouth? So the first step I always teach is kind of the chapstick trick, and that is that everyone's put on chapstick at some point in their life. Occasionally we'll find one or two that don't remember, you know, I've never done that. And you're like, whoa. But I always just tell them, pretend your finger and you're just going to draw a line and get that, and that teaches them how to get that bottom lip over their bottom teeth and not put it all in their mouth, because you have that problem too. And you've got to have a thin line in and out over the bottom teeth and on the other side. So that's the first step. The second step is that their top teeth need to be on the mouthpiece, but where they put it on the mouthpiece is a big deal. So I always make sure that I have an older patch, apologize, but I like it because I can show my beginners where I'm going to put my top teeth. It's not way down here, it's not even halfway, it's literally pretty close to the tip of the mouthpiece. And then my bottom lip, where does that go? And the biggest number one problem is young clarinet players, even through high school, I find, take too little bottom lip. So they have the biggest problem in where do I place my bottom lip?
I'm preparing. You've shown me this before. I know what you're going to do.
If we had any bag of tricks, this is the number one most amazing trick that I learned a long time ago from my teachers. So how do you know where to put your bottom lip? So you take a piece of paper and you literally slide it between the reed and the mouthpiece. Where the reed and the mouthpiece meet, like you're not going to try to cram it all the way down. It's like right in the snug position where the reed and the mouthpiece meet. That's where your bottom lip is going to go. Depending on the facing of mouthpiece, some will be a little more or a little less. But typically, it's about almost halfway down the reed itself, before you get to the bark, you're a little bit less than halfway. And that's where your bottom lip is going to go. If you don't put it in the right place, or if it's too high, like most typical young clarinetists, if it's too high, you're not getting a full vibration from the reed. You're stifling the reed from being able to vibrate at its fullest potential. And therefore, you're stifling the sound. You're going to have a muffled sound. Now, if you go too far with your bottom lip, you will squeak. So it's kind of like the baby bear. I always, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's like, where do I put it? Not too high, not too low, just right. And that's always hard. But if you have this visual aid to help guide them, it's quicker. You're not trying to sit there and figure up and down the elevator. You're immediately zoned in on where does my bottom lip go. So that's the first key I find in helping all those tips. Where do my top teeth go? Where does my bottom lip go? Then we think about how we're going to form our bottom lip. That we're going to put our top teeth on the mouthpiece. Then our top lip has to kind of, I always feel like it's kind of like a bunny rabbit where you're pressing down. And that's the pressure you're going to put on the mouthpiece. The last thing is crucial, and that's the corners. That you're squeezing the corners of your mouth. Ew. And that you're hugging the sides of the mouthpiece. And then the last thing I talk to young people about is where's your tongue? Where's your tongue position? Because if it's low, you're going to get a really honky, a very uncharacteristic and kind of grotesque clarinet sound. Your tongue needs to be in E position, kind of like so that when it's because we can't see inside our children's, we can't see what they're doing inside their mouths. So I use my visual aid, meaning my finger, and I show them your tongue position should be in E position, arched, so that when you articulate in slow motion, I'm showing you, you're going to press against the tip of the reed and the tip of the tongue. So the tip of the tongue touches the tip of the reed, and it goes back and forth like so. So that's how you want your tongue position to be in the back of your mouth. So those are just some little tips and tricks that I use with my students.
Right now, my clarinet section is having a lot of tuning issues. Can you talk to us about tuning? If you want to be specific, I have an A that is, I can't get in tune. It's 40 cents sharp. What do I do? What are some common tuning problems?
Well, and again, that goes back to what brand are you playing, what mouthpieces, reeds, is the reed too old, is the reed too, soft, that sort of, because they all have to be changed. But in typical, let's say we've got a clarinet, it's all green. Why is my A not in tune? So this is where we got the whole sign in the yard thing again. We have two school of thoughts when it comes to throat tones. G sharp, A, and A sharp, or B flat. Throat tones are always precarious. Not only can they be a little kind of fuzzy in sound, just depending, but they also have a lot of technically intonation problems. So that's where the thought of resonant fingerings comes into play. So that helps with intonation tremendously. And it changes. So if we're playing an open G and we add our right hand, you can add 1 and 3, you can add 1 and 2, 2 and 3, just one finger on the bottom. You can add the pinky key. I call it pinky key, right pinky number 2. You can even so much as add the second and third finger on the top hand and use those as well. So you have options to figure out which way those resonant fingerings will help the intonation. That's how I fix all the throat tones. I use resonant fingerings to fix that. That's if there's really extreme issues, you're going to end up using all. And that's when I would look at what is the positioning of the key. Is it too high? The spring may be wearing out, and so then the tone hole will open up and will cause some intonation issues. So you want to look at that if you're starting to add more fingers because of intonation. But typically, it could be also tongue position. So as they lower their tongue, it's going to go flat. So they need to you might want to see if they're keeping their tongue position in the right place to prevent them from going flat.
Now, speaking of tuning, you told me that you played on a buffet personally for 20, 30 years, right?
Yes.
And you've recently switched. And you said it's because you feel like this horn has less of those tuning issues throughout the whole gamut of the instrument. Can you speak on that?
Yes. So I was approached by Conselmer and asked to be an artist with them about 3 years ago. And actually, it was 4 years ago. But I spent a year really evaluating their instrument. I didn't feel, I lived in the buffet box for a very long time, and it's a wonderful product, it's a wonderful instrument, but I was having issues with it from many different levels, whether it be beginner level or advanced pro level, and I was just having a lot of issues finding the right intonation without having to adjust all of the different ways that we do as a buffet player. And so I took him to heart, and I actually really spent some time with the technicians, with the instruments themselves, and even with Julian Bliss, who is the creator of the Serenade with LeBlanc, and talked to him a lot about intonation and how he came about creating the pitch scale for his instrument, as well as all of our products, whether it be the Selmer Presence or the one I play, which is the Privilege. So the intonation scale is much more even. There's very little fluctuation between registers. And there are notes, no instrument is perfect in its intonation. There's no such animal. Unless it's electronic. And then that's not going to happen in the real world of bands. So I felt like I was really impressed with the evenness throughout the scale, the evenness from register from the different registers of the clarinet. So like from the shallow to the throat tones to the clarion to the altissimo, I felt like the entire scale of the instrument was fantastic. There's a few quirky things on every note that we all have, but the fact that I didn't have to. One thing I had to learn how to do is not adjust, not have to constantly be changing what I'm doing in order to make it play in tune. And that's what I find fascinating about our Conselmer products, is they really do take to heart, and the craftsmanship of the instrument is very, very detailed.
And who did you say designed it?
So the Serenade was originally designed by Conselmer. The Presence, the Prologue, and the one I play on, which is the Privilege, are products of the Selmer Paris factory in Paris, France.
Right.
And those technicians out there are the ones that created the instruments. But when they created the Presence, which is your pro level horn for most high school students when they enter into the pro horn, those clarinets, the artistry that goes into it, whether it's intonation or tone color or the ergonomics of the keys, very well done. And they take their time, and they use the finest wood. They use the top of the line grenadilla, and that to me is outstanding. That's what we want. That's what we want for our students. We want a product that's going to last and stay and have consistency. And I'll go and try an Elkhart. They'll ask me to, through our Artist Select program, a music company that I work with in Keller called Bell's Music Shop. They have me go out as their artist, and I do an Artist Select. So I go to Elkhart and I pick out 4 horns. They'll usually set up about 30 for me. I have a very hard time finding my favorite 4 because they're all so amazing. They really, I'm like, all right, well, can I take all 30 back with me, because they're great. They have a little difference as far as the color goes, but as far as the intonation and the quality, it's outstanding.
Well, we could probably talk for a long time about all this stuff. One last thing I just wanted you to comment on are with some fingerings. There's always, on every woodwind instrument, there's always which fingerings to use when. What is your some philosophies on regular versus chromatic or alternate fingerings?
So there's really 3 sets I always, teach my students in 3 stages, and this is from beginner level all the way to professional level. So you have 3 stages, and one is obviously first and foremost, and that's chromatic fingering. So we start with our chromatic fingerings, and we learn certain specific ways to finger, and it's probably about 7 or 8 different notes that can be adjusted with different alternate fingerings. So we start with chromatic, then we have what we call regular fingering. So I'll give an example. So with B natural, and this is on the lower end, so this is 2 spaces below the staff. B natural can be fingered middle, or we would if we were telling our students, it'd be thumb 1, 2, 3, and 5. Sometimes 1, 2, 3, and 2, or middle. I just say middle. And another way that would be a regular fingering. A chromatic fingering would be thumb 1, 2, 3, 1, and fork key. So, or sometimes people call it the bottom sliver, but that is a chromatic fingering. And then you have, there can be alternate fingerings. So for example, another example would be E flat. So a regular fingering for E flat would be thumb 1, 2, side key, the bottom side key, number 1. The chromatic fingering is thumb 1, 2, I call it the banana key. I like to make a difference between this sliver and this sliver. So I call it the banana key, but a lot of people call it the sliver key. So that is the chromatic fingering for E flat, but there's an alternate fingering, and that's thumb 1 and 1. So you have some notes, some of our scaled notes actually have 3 different ways to finger it. So you have your chromatic, you have your regular fingering, and you have your alternate. Now, where it gets really confusing sometimes when you're looking at a technical piece like an all-state. So I'm working with a high school student on their all-state etudes. We have developed the skill over time, and we try to teach our students as they get older which fingering would work best in that particular technical passage. Or if it's a lyrical etude, do we need to do a resonant fingering? Do we need to do something different to make it sound better? Or just to have more fluidity in the phrase. So there's so many, fingerings. Wow, it can be daunting. But if we start with chromatic and we also talk about regular, usually we cover most of, 90% of it, and then we've got the extra 10 with, some alternate fingerings thrown in.
Where can people find you? So they want you to come out. How do they get in contact with you?
So there's a couple ways. Of course, email, phone. They can text or call, but also through Van Doren and the VRA program, the Van Doren Regional Artist. So it's VRA. If you go to the Van Doren website, you'll find all the Van Doren artists. There are we have several in the state of Texas. I think there are about 4 or 5 of us. And you can specifically request me, and I would come out and do a master class with your students. They would get reads and some swag and a whole lot of knowledge, both for the students and for the directors as well. We would make sure that everybody is covered in our master class. So the VRA program is one way to get in touch with me. Consumer Institute, which is the educational division of Consumer, is another way that they can get in contact with me if they email that program and ask, can we get, meet Kristen Boulet to come out and do an educational type or informational type class on the products, on the instruments themselves. And that's what Consumer is about. So there's 2 ways there.
Well, I'm sure we can talk for another 2 hours about clarinet pedagogy, but I'll let you go because I know you have your booth to go back to. Thank you so much for being a part of the program, and thanks for coming on Beyond the Clef.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super honored to be here.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Clef. For more great content, subscribe on our website at beyondtheclef.com, and be sure to follow us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Facebook.